Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you all to this joint news conference. The President and I have had a very lengthy discussion about bilateral relations, about world affairs. I'm delighted to welcome him as the first ever Russian head of state or head of government, or indeed any head of state or head of government to visit it under a former constitutional iteration in Russia ever, and that gives the visit a great importance. As well, we have just signed a new nuclear safeguards agreement which completely updates the arrangements for nuclear safeguards between our two countries. Russia is an important player in the affairs of the world, a very significant force and a very significant country of influence, not only within the European sphere, but within the Middle East and within our own part of the world. Mr. President, I very warmly welcome you to our country. We have long held a deep interest in Russia. We understand the extraordinary history and the extraordinary suffering over many years for many reasons of the Russian people. We respect your modern economy, your modern nation, and I hope that this visit plays a significant part in furthering the good bilateral relations that exist between our two nations.
Prime Minister, ladies and gentlemen, from the outset I'd like to thank leaders of Australia for the opportunity to hold separate meetings within the framework of APEC. This year marks, I've already told Prime Minister about that, marks 200 years of first contacts between Russia and Australia, 150 years of our consular relations, and 65 years of our diplomatic relations. The volume of our mutually beneficial ties is growing in all directions, so we are cooperating quite well on the international scene, on major issues of the international agenda. We are actively working in the international organizations, the United Nations, the APEC, the summit of which will start tomorrow. Our trade is also growing in absolute figures. It is still not considerable, but the rates are remarkable, and they say that we have an untapped potential. Last year, our trade grew by about 80%. For the first half of 2007, the growth was about 40%, more than 40%. We have good prospects for cooperation. The Prime Minister mentioned nuclear energy, but this is not all we are interested in. Trade is growing. 25% of this trade falls on agricultural products. Mutual investments are growing. Russian investments are bigger than the Australian ones. We have accumulated about 0.5 billion, and there are 1.5 billion of Russian investments to the Australian economy. We have good prospects in high-tech areas, including in exploring the outer space. It is a pleasure to say that our dialogue was extremely open, substantial, and warm. I would like to thank the Prime Minister for this atmosphere. Thank you for your attention.
Two questions from each of the media groups. First of all, could we have a question from the Russian press?
My question is to two leaders. Vladimir Vladimirovich, how you assess the cooperation of Australia and Russia in the nuclear area, including given the signed agreement. In Australian press, there are blames that Russia will use this for nuclear weapons. How do you, what's your attitude, Prime Minister, to these assessments?
Well, my attitude to these assessments is that they are wrong, that any uranium that is sold to Russia will be sold subject to very strict safeguards. And the President in our discussion made the point that I think is relevant, that Russia already has an enormous amount of military nuclear material which it is selling principally to the United States for reprocessing. So if you apply logic to the allegation, it lacks substance.
Что касается нашего
On our cooperation in nuclear energy, I think it is a promising cooperation. We can work on a bilateral basis, on a multilateral basis, given our proposal on setting up international centers on enrichment. We have all necessary technologies for this. We have raw materials. And as you know, Australia is country number one in terms of reserves. 40% of reserves are in Australia. In Russia, to implement military programs, the existing materials are sufficient. Moreover, the volume of materials which we regard as weapon grade is excessive. For many years, we have bought this enriched uranium to the United States, where it is being reprocessed, and we sell it to the North American market. Just for you to understand, I can say that to produce one nuclear weapon, about 20% of enriched uranium is needed. We sell 30 tons per year in the United States, and the overall volume amounts to 500 tons. Those who say about the opportunity to use, that Russia will use Australian uranium for military purposes, they simply do not understand, or they give this thesis on purpose to impede the cooperation of two countries.
From the Australian media, Andrew Probyn from Western Australian.
Mr. President, Andrew Probyn from the West Australian newspaper. My question also goes to uranium and another matter. What assurances can you give that Australian uranium sold to Russia would not be used for military purposes or on-sold to third countries such as Iran? And secondly, there are concerns of a regional arms builder fueled by your arms deal, your very recent arms deal with Indonesia. What's your response to those concerns?
Начну с последнего.
I'll start with the last one. Indonesia is a full-fledged member of the international community. Thanks God, the country is under no sanctions. Therefore, purchase and selling of weapons on international markets cannot be restricted through cooperation between Indonesia and Russia in this area. These are legal and open transactions, and they lead to no negative consequences in the world. They do not somehow disturb any balance. And now on weapon-grade uranium, I have already answered this question. You can use this answer. We need to sell 500 tons with our American partners on the North American market. 500 tons of weapon-grade uranium from Russia. Why should we spend money on Australian uranium? In terms of Australian uranium, we will buy it only given our plans to develop peaceful nuclear energy. In the Soviet era, we built about 30 big power units on the nuclear power plants of the Russian Federation.